But here is this today's HaYom, wisdom of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Haskes Ushma Yisrael means prepare yourselves, hearken, whatever, listen. Haskes, give attention and listen, Jews. Okay, now these sentences, you have to understand something about the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, it was something like King David. All he had was troubles his whole life. His whole life was just one of troubles and difficulties. He was born, he took over the leadership of Chabad when communism was taking over, had effectively taken over Russia. And into the second years, that's when communism really started to get powerful and cruel. It was unbelievable cruelty, unbelievable cold cruelty. And he was sentenced to death. The Rebbe was sentenced to death for spreading Judaism. He was sentenced to death, and he had only way to spread Judaism was with total self-sacrifice. So he had to send a lot of times his followers to death, to almost certain death, in order to teach children Torah, in order to make a mikveh, in order to provide kosher meat for people, and in order to convince people to not give up on God. Stalin was like, the proof, ultimate proof that, Judaism doesn't work. Millions and millions of Jews just left Judaism. They became ardent communists. Communist was real. That was the hope of the world. Stalin was the light of the nations. And here was the previous Rebbe standing alone against this man, alone against him. He was the only one spreading out Judaism, sending his. And certainly there were individuals that personally, on their own selves, that weren't Chabad, that did, self-sacrificing, heroic things. But the Rebbe did it in a massive way with his pupils. He had to send them out. And he was attached to his pupils more than a father was attached to a son. When something bad happened to them, it tore his heart. And eventually, he was put into prison, sentenced to death. Miraculously, he got out. He was tortured in prison. And then he got out into Poland. And in Poland, all the other groups were against him. He didn't even like to talk about it. And finally began World War II. And he was at the bombing of Warsaw. And then he came to America only to be met by like the Reform movement and the conservative movement and all these Jews that were just leaving Judaism in droves. Right? And there he had to work on it. When he came to America, he was already like half paralyzed. He was brought into America in a wheelchair, 1940. Okay, so he said, listen, pay attention and listen, Jews. The troubles of this time are just preparation for the Mashiach. This is the time that Mashiach is supposed to come. Now is the time Mashiach is supposed to come. Now, the sufferings that are occurring to us, that's the birth pains of Mashiach. A woman, before she gives birth, it's terrible screams. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it's not a nice thing to hear. The Jewish people will be redeemed only through tshuva, through returning to God. Don't have faith in the false prophets who assure you of glories and salvations after the war. This is mainly Zionism. Remember the word of God. Cursed is the man who puts his trust in man, who places his reliance for help in human beings and turns his heart from God. Sentence in Jeremiah. Return, Jews, to your God. Prepare yourself and your family to go forth and receive Mashiach, whose arrival is imminent. It's supposed to be any second now. So here the Rebbe is not telling you not to be involved in the world. The Rebbe is telling you where to put your faith. Where to put your faith. The Rebbe established places the Rebbe established the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe before he passed away 1 year. before he passed away, he established Kfar Chabad in Israel. He was not against Israel, and he was not against Israelis, and he was not against Jews, and he was not against the Zionists. He was against Zionism. He was against the whole philosophy that the Israel could be fixed up without Mashiach, that it could be fixed up even without Torah and commandments. That's the main idea. But the main idea is Zionism was a movement that said you can fix up Israel, fix all the problems without Mashiach. That's all. You don't need Mashiach. Mashiach will come afterwards. And that's the whole thing that he was against. You can't do that. And so he was very against. So he said, keep your mind on Mashiach. Keep your mind on the truth. It's terrible. There seems to be a million indications that it's not going to happen. It has to be done naturally. He says, don't put your faith in those people. Your faith has to be in Mashiach and only in Mashiach. As we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. One second.